Hello everyone. We are at the Applied Machine Learning Days in Lausanne, Switzerland, and I'm meeting Olivier Corradi here. He's the initiator of electricityMap and the founder of Tomorrow. And I'm really glad that we can have this conversation.
Thank you for the invitation, yeah.
How about you start by talking about what electricityMap is?
Right, so electricityMap started out now 4 years ago with me having a keen interest in energy systems and decarbonization. And the main question I wanted to answer is, what happens when the wind doesn't blow? Can you actually still be 100% renewable powered? Because I was annoyed at all those headlines that says, 100% renewable now in Portugal and Denmark and so on. And I said, okay, is 100% renewable, is that something really achievable? How difficult is it to get there? And how much does it help us? The first thing I did was just gather a bit of data around the topic, started a small data visualization for myself that showcased in real time where the electricity comes from in certain countries of interest. It was Germany, France, and the Nordics at the time, so Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. And then I simply open sourced it, and then suddenly people started looking at it, wanted to contribute to it as well, and I figured, okay, this can actually become big. So in a nutshell, what electricityMap does is, in a very intuitive sense, gives you a color on the map that showcases you, if you were to charge, for example, your electric vehicle at that time, how much greenhouse gas would you emit by consuming 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. So if it's green, good time to charge. If it's not, bad time to charge. And to that extent, it should be said that it's greenhouse gases. So there's a lot of other things you could be taking into account when you say, it's green or not. Nuclear, for example, is one very, very controversial aspect. But we look only at greenhouse gases on this topic.
Right. So you're already talking about it. Maybe we can have a look at it for 1 second.
Sure.
So here we can see electricityMap, and we can zoom in maybe a little bit. So you said you started with Denmark in the beginning?
So the prototype only had a couple of countries. It had Denmark, France, Norway, and Sweden. But very quickly, I wanted to visualize how much the wind was blowing and to see if the country was green because the wind was blowing or not. And actually, if I put this in dark mode, it's going to look cooler. But Denmark seems rather green right now. Is it because the wind is blowing, or not that much? But maybe Ireland. Okay, so you can see actually right now in Ireland the wind is blowing quite significantly.
Okay, and how much electricity is generated by wind?
Right. 60% of the electricity in Ireland comes from wind. So it takes into account the interconnectors, the imports and exports.
Yeah.
You can see here on the Irish interconnectors, they're mostly off. So right now it's mostly generation that dictates how green the electricity is. Right. But if you look at how much the wind is blowing, you'll probably see you can see here there's a lot of purple, so there's a lot of wind right now blowing through Ireland, which explains exactly why there's so much wind production right now.
Oh wow, this is a really great visualization. And you can also see the energy that is exported to other countries, right? You can also click on, for example, how much energy Great Britain imports from France right now, right? And you can
exactly.
Can see that it's 68 grams CO2 per kilowatt hour.
Yeah, so in that sense you can see that Great Britain is getting a slightly more green thanks to the interconnector to France that is lowering the carbon intensity.
And what is the factor here, like CO2 EQ divided by kilowatt hours?
Yeah, so CO2 equivalent is a measure of greenhouse gases in general. So because you have different greenhouse gases, you have CO2, you have methane, you have nitrous oxide and so on. In order to make them comparable, what we look at is, for each one of them, what is the global warming potential it has, so the ability to warm up the atmosphere over the next 100 years. And then we basically say for methane, what is the equivalent amount in mass of CO2 that will give the same warming potential. And you do the same thing with all greenhouse gases, and you compare them then to a unit that we call CO2 equivalent, which says, what's the amount of warming that I get out there if it was only CO2, and that's the unit that's here. So basically it enables you to standardize all greenhouse gases into one unit. Okay. And so the unit is greenhouse gas, so CO2 equivalent divided by kilowatt hour. So it basically means if I want to have 1 kilowatt hour of energy from my power plug to power whatever, my heating, my car, my lights, how much CO2 emissions do they come in the process by CO2 greenhouse gases?
Right. What are the data sources? Where do you get the data from? Who provides them? And how do you think, how accurate are they, and how trustworthy are the data sources?
Yeah, so you have an entity that's called the Transmission System Operator. TSO is the short version of it. That entity is state-owned, country, it's national-wide, and it is an entity that is responsible for maintaining the balance of the whole electricity system in a given country. For example, in France it would be RTE, in Denmark it would be Energinet, in the Netherlands it would be Tenet, and so on.
Right.
They are opening up their data in real time that showcases what is the production of the different systems. The reason why they do this is simply that they want as much open data to be out there to enable as many actors to stabilize the system and to help them orchestrate this whole thing. So they have a benefit in opening up that data. And then you have one entity that we work very closely with who's called ENTSO-E. It's a European network of TSOs. They aggregate and clean up the data for all of the European actors, because then you have a European directive that actually stipulates that every country needs to open up that data. So this is a wave we've been fortunate to ride on, is that there's entities that are aggregating this data and opening it up, which enables us then to directly tap into it.
Oh wow, great.
So it's a completely different story, however, as soon as you go outside of Europe, because there it's not, you don't have the same data quality constraints that I have given by the European Union, but you still have open data that is out there. There's different systems depending on which countries you are at.
Okay, and how about the data frequency? How often can you pull data? How often is there new data points? Is it every hour, every 2 hours, every few minutes? Or?
So the data frequency really depends on the availability of the data itself. You have countries that give data by the minute, and you have others that give it by the hour. We have requirements on electricity map that we only look at electricity data that is at the hourly level or better. If it's on a daily basis, then we don't look at it, basically. Right. And the other thing is that the delay needs to be 2 hours, within the last 2 hours. This is what we're going to show on electricity map, simply because we want to be able to show meaningful pictures to people coming to the website. And if we suddenly showcase that the solar production, even though the sun has gone down, this is a bit unfortunate.
Right.
So the data you'll see on electricity map is always at most 2 hours old, else the country becomes gray and it disappears from the visualization.
So then it's gray. Okay. As you can see here, some other countries are grayed out.
Exactly.
Like okay, so now we can be fairly sure, for example, that the carbon intensity in Germany right now is 260 grams, and we can see that 73% are low carbon and 61% are renewable. And I guess it is cloudy in Switzerland. I guess it's mostly cloudy in most parts of Germany right now. It's probably also the wind turbines that are causing the renewables. Okay. And here we can see, we can actually have a look at the details. All right, wind. You can see wind is 43% of the electricity. Yeah,
it's a good day. It's a very good day for Germany right now on the renewable side.
Norway is consuming 99% renewable energy. Does it help to also expose countries that might appear more greener than they actually are? For example, in the case of Norway, half of Norway's exports is crude oil and natural gas.
Yeah, so we have to be careful when we talk about energy, because it's very easy to mix up energy and electricity in those sense. So this map only shows electricity, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at the case of Norway, for example, they basically have 99% hydro. So if you consume electricity in Norway, great, you're almost carbon free, right? But as you know, Norway has also a lot of oil exploitations. They use oil, they export oil, even though they actually have one of the highest electrification percentages in the world. But we are actually looking to develop a map that might be looking at not only electricity, but energy in general. So that would also look at the fossil fuels used for transportation, for agriculture, for heating, and so on. So this map is only about electricity. So you have countries that are green here, that aren't green in a greenhouse gas perspective, because they use greenhouse gases for other activities than electricity generation.
Okay, I understand. So the biggest polluters around the world are the US, China, and India. And if we can zoom out, we can see that you have some partial data from some states in the US, like California, like East Coast and New York, West Coast, especially. Not so much of the red states in the middle. But India, you have also partial data from India, but not
Australia
all,
as well.
And China, not yet. And you also said we have some regulations in the European Union which makes the access to data much easier than elsewhere. What's the big challenge in getting these big polluters on the map? Is there data that exists, but it's hard to access it because there's, for example, China, it's not a democratic country, so they might not give access to it? Or do you think there's even like problems in collecting the data, because in parts of India, communities run on diesel generators and it's probably not recorded that it happens?
Yeah, honestly, the biggest limitation to data availability is often monitoring. Like the countries that have data, they actually know they have the sensors out, they have the monitoring capabilities, they usually put the data out just because it has such a strong transformation aspect. It also helps a lot on understanding how the markets work, not even from a greenhouse gas perspective. So I wouldn't say that electricity map has so much fame that countries are reluctant to share data because they don't want to appear black on the map. However, we are using this to our advantage to try to pressure countries to open up data. And this is something that happened, for example, for Holland, where we pressured the ministry and Senate and so on to open up the data. At some point they did. We also know that they had troubles on monitoring their systems internally, or at least they didn't have built out the full capacity to do it. Now they have. It's hard. I wouldn't give ourselves the credit at all, but I'm surely happy that we've been able to, add another pressure point there, and we are trying to replicate that to all countries in the world. Also, you have to know that this thing is only real-time data. I am playing around with the idea of extending this to also have monthly and annual averages, and we have actually data for China on annual basis, right? The only thing is you don't have real-time data. So it sort of gives you different insights, but I'm playing around with the idea of having an annual average here that could, the whole map would be filled if we had the annual average.
I think this would be great to see the momentary consumption, but also see like some statistical averages.
In the end, I'm very confident we'll be able to get the data. We'll bridge the gap with annual averages, because what matters is that people understand, the different decarbonization strategies that are out there. There's not a gazillion of them. Either you go hydro, and that is most of the hydro potential in the world is already somewhat exploited, because either you have hills and valleys and you can do something, or you don't have them. Then you can't do it. You're not going to start building hills in order to generate hydroelectricity, right? Yeah. Then you have nuclear. Nuclear is controversial, but it is like a big, stable, non-intermittent source of low carbon electricity. Again, only talking about CO2 or greenhouse gases. And then you have renewables with the big problem that they're intermittent. So what do you do when when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine? As soon as you put batteries on top of that, the footprint get multiplied, by a factor of 2 to 10. Okay. So batteries are not at all neutral in that sense. You really have to be careful about the footprint of batteries. And again, it depends on what kind of storage you're looking at. Right. There's different kinds of storage. Batteries are one piece of the storage equation. But basically three ways to become carbon neutral or low carbon, to have low carbon electricity generation for a country: nuclear, hydro, and renewables.
All right. Well, since you have the fluctuation with renewable energy, depending on the wind and the solar, there's often standby plants, right? Standby coal plants.
Exactly.
and gas plants. So to fill the gaps, because you always have to stabilize the grid. Do you see some potential that we can reduce standby plants in the future by better predicting the weather and the wind?
Yes, I think there's a huge opportunity in general in energy markets, but I think they're well designed in the sense that you have a well-functioning market that gives incentives for anyone to be able to predict how much the wind is going to blow in the next 24 hours. And if you're very good at that, you're going to earn money on the markets. But the good news is, if you earn money on the market, you are in principle enabling some gas turbines to not be on standby, because your uncertainty is very small. So you don't need them just in case you made a mistake in your prediction, right? So that's one of the only few cases where suddenly trading has a very good aspect. It's not only speculation, it's actually reducing the uncertainty in the whole system.
Who can benefit the most from it? You think it's like some really heavy energy intense industry, or is it some organizations, or is it individual people? Who do you think will benefit the most by having this data?
So there's a lot of people who have historically benefited from this data since electricity.map came out. So there's three buckets. There's enterprises, companies in general, there's energy experts, and then there are individuals, citizens in general. And we have some citizens that come to us and said, whoa, I didn't realize that X was greener than I thought, or I didn't realize that there was so much wind there, or there was so little wind there, or that pollen was so bad, or all those things. And that is for me one of the key drivers. We always say that policy needs to make the first step. You need the regulation to step in. For me, this is one of the tools that can help to educate the citizens and to make sure that we get enough of them to vote for the right things, to be educated about the topic, such that we get the policy changes that we want. So this is one key impact. If you look at more the energy experts and the NGOs, we have helped companies, like one of our customers, for example, and partners is Sandbag. So it's a European institution that is monitoring very precisely coal emissions, ETS prices, so the European trading schemes. And they also have, thanks to our data, published a report that showcases exactly, okay, what is the decarbonization trends in Europe, and trying to educate policymakers on those topics. Those we help as well with our data. And then you have the last piece, which for me is extremely exciting, which are companies that are suspected to move to more electric consumption. So if you think about the world in general and the solution we have to climate change, it is to electrify everything, right? Electric planes, electric boats, electric heating,
cars,
everything, cars. And so you have a bunch of new electric vehicle companies coming up. When you come home and you charge your electric vehicle and you just plug it in, it has the whole night to charge. Why doesn't it wait to the optimal time to charge, the time where the network constraints are lower or when the wind is blowing? And we actually managed to do a prototype where we saw that you can reduce between 10 and 20% of CO2, reduce your emissions by 20% if you use electricity at the right time. So if you zoom out for a second, you look at everyone who uses a lot of electricity that are flexible, that can move their consumption around, and we want to tell them, look, just consume the electricity at the right time and don't do it manually, have a system that automatically does it. So we're looking at electric mobility, but also data centers, because data centers use a lot of electricity. They are on an incredible growth right now. And so if they don't manage their carbon emissions, we're going to have a problem there. The interesting thing with data centers is that a lot of the load of the data processing that happens is jobs that are run overnight, so they can be shifted around to the right time. And also because data centers are located in different places, when the wind is not blowing in Denmark, maybe it's blowing in Spain, for example, and you can move that computation around to the right place.
So do you think there could also be some purely economical incentives to companies who, for example, purchase some CO2 certificates? Do you think it could also help them to kind of reduce the number of CO2 certificates that they need to purchase by, I don't know, running their machines according to this information?
Yeah, so if we talk about the financial incentives, there's a couple of them. So if you look at the electricity market, what happens often is because renewable is so cheap, when the wind blows, often the price of electricity is much lower. So if you, like for example in Denmark, I think we have a 70 to 80% correlation between the price of electricity and the greenhouse gas emissions. And the last 30% often come from the interconnectors that don't communicate perfectly that information yet. So if you are a company using a lot of electricity, you will save money by being greener in that sense.
All right. So how many people are working on electricity grid at the moment? I know it's the code is available on GitHub, and you can join the Slack community to contribute. How many people are working on improving it right now?
There's a lot of people working on electricity map. So right now internally we have 3 people working on electricity map, sort of on the AI side, on the front end side, and on the back end side. But suddenly if you look at the whole community as well, there's a lot of people involved. Like we just had more, I think we finished more than 1,000 contribution since we started the electricity map. We just closed that off a couple of months ago. So it was kind of a milestone for us. I think we've had more than 100 contributors to the electricity map. So contributors in that sense mean anyone who has submitted code to the system, right? So it's not, it actually takes a lot of willpower to, copy the code, understand how it works, and submit some code, and then it gets integrated into the system.
Yeah,
and then on Slack,
hurdles.
Exactly. And then on Slack, I don't even remember how many people we have nowadays, but I know it's very active. We have a lot of people joining all the time.
I joined it at some point, and I was really, I was really surprised that there were like every day people joined and introduced themselves and tried to contribute. I think it's really great, and I hope that schools and universities, especially also policymakers and any politician, will know about it and can use it for educational purposes.
This was the first part of the interview. The second part is about the startup called Tomorrow, which emerged from electricityMap. If you want to watch it, you'll find a link in the video description.